Today we're going to talk about mental barriers to performance or performance enhancement. What we're going to talk about there is the pieces of identity, personal identity and sport identity. We're going to talk about values and their relationship to your goals and the way that you behave and your commitment to your behaviors across the board, whether that's in your daily life, in your training regimens, and in your time at the cliff. So one of the big ticket items that we're talking about today is identity and who you are as a climber. Lots of times when we're working with athletes, we are combating the discussion between, well, are you or am I a rock climber first, or am I a boulderer first? Am I a rock climber first, or am I a trad climber first? While that might seem like a small distinction between the two, one is really facilitative of long-term overall improvement and specifically enjoyment along the way with that improvement, being like identifying as a climber, as somebody who enjoys being at the cliff with a community, with a significant other or a partner, and enjoys the process of being better at climbing overall. That can be really facilitative of improvement. But sometimes we see people who stick to a more condensed version or a more condensed identity where they're talking about, oh, I am a boulderer, or I only go sport climbing, or I am a trad climber. And while that can be in the short term beneficial in specific ways to facilitate achieving an alpine route or getting up a big wall or achieving a specific boulder problem or a project that you have in that realm, it can also be very limiting when you step into different arenas. And so I think it's important to understand that when we use terms like I am a boulderer or I am a trad climber, that can be limiting in our progression in other areas of the sport. And it's important to be able to step back from that position and say, okay, am I having a hard time with this route, or am I stepping away from this route because I identify more with a different type of climbing? Or is it because I'm afraid of clipping bolts, or I'm not really sure how gear works, or I don't know how body tension works in a bouldering specific aspect? The second component to this understanding is an identification of personal values. And so typically when we're talking about values as an individual, you might think of things outside of the performance arena. So like family or religion or community, physical fitness. You might consider creativity to be a part of somebody's personal values. But what we want to make sure is that we're creating a space where we have an understanding of our performance values or our values as a rock climber. And so what might those things be? They might be like striving for always being better, or working hard, or community around climbing, or partnership, training, physical fitness as it relates to climbing, things like that. Values should be considered something that enhance how you behave and help direct the way that you behave in the arenas that you're in. They need to be thought of as more of the way that the journey unfolds rather than the end of the journey. And they're a great way and a great thing to reflect on in terms of how we behave or the goals that we create for ourselves. And so in that sense, if we have an understanding of the things that we want or the way that we want to behave in rock climbing, then we can start to formulate our own personal goals as it relates to the things that we value. And so this is more about, goals are more about what we want in the end. What do we want our outcomes to be? And we've touched on goals in the past here, noting that they need to be both short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And they need to be both training related and performance related and process outcome related. But the important connection to make here is that the goals that we create for ourselves for rock climbing need to be able to be connected back to the things that we value, because our values are going to inevitably shape and help the way that we behave and the actions that we take to achieve those inevitable goals. And so what might that look like? Well, let's say that I have a goal of climbing 13A tomorrow. Well, if I'm going to do that, what is a behavior or an action that I can take that serves the value of being one step better or being able to try hard? Well, that might be as simple as going to bed earlier, or eating a healthier dinner, or drinking more water the day before. Because then the next morning I can wake up and say to myself, did I behave in a way that was in line with the values that I have, getting better, that ultimately support the things that I want to send to 13A? And so in this way, we have a cyclical relationship between who I am as a rock climber, the things that I value as a rock climber, getting better, striving to do better one more time, community, things like that, and then taking some type of committed action that are facilitative of those things. When we understand the interaction between our identity, so who we are as a rock climber, and the values that we have, the way that we want to behave, the way that we want to be remembered, or the way that we want to remember our experiences of the crag, and the goals that we create for ourselves and the behaviors that we take in action towards those goals, we need to understand that these are complex concepts, and they aren't something that will be created and formulated overnight, and they should evolve and do. And so when we're working with our athletes with these concepts, it's over long periods of time. This might be a 6-month process or a 12-month process to really hash out what exactly does this athlete want out of their climbing, and how do they want to be remembered as a rock climber. Those are values to create over a long-term period of thought. With that, we need to understand that alongside any other practice in the challenge of getting better at anything, we need to be able to reflect on the way that we behaved and the things that we said we wanted, or the way that we want it to be. And so all of this is good and well, identity, values, goals, and actions. And let's assume that you leave here and you write down an initial thought about that. Well, if you never return to that initial thought, then it might not have been worth it in the beginning. And so my request to you, or my request to my athletes, is to periodically, both short-term and long-term, reflect on the way that you behaved daily, weekly, and monthly, and ask yourself a very simple question. Did my behaviors today, or this week, or this month, reflect the values that I said I have and who I want to become in light of the goals that I said I want to achieve? And if you can reflect honestly about those things, then you can definitively say, yes or no, I did act accordingly to the way that I wanted to be, or I didn't. And if you didn't, then behavior change needs to happen from there. And so you say, what's the smallest little action that I can change or refine that will push me into a direction that I want to go? So when we're thinking about breaking through mental plateaus or mental barriers to our improvement, we want to make sure that we're considering first how we think about ourselves in relationship to climbing. So who am I and what do I want to become in terms of a rock climber? What are the values that I have in a performance and training environment? Striving to work hard, doing one better, being part of a community. What are the goals that I have outlined for myself and how do they relate to who I am and how I want to behave? And then what kind of reflection do I have around the behaviors and the actions that I take to ultimately achieve those goals and work in light of the values that I have?